Welcome back to Cities on Console. Welcome if you're new. Today, we'll be doing our weekly Dev Diary deep dive, and this one is about economy and production. As we all know, economy and production are going to be the life's blood of any cities we build in Cities Skylines 2. We learned a lot of the basics and fundamentals in our featured highlights reaction video a couple days ago, but today we'll be diving deep into the Dev Diary to get all the details and specifics and possibly even uncover a few secrets along the way. Before getting into the video, however, I want to ask you to consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already, and to drop a like if you end up enjoying today's video or finding it informative. And as always, please also feel free to drop a dislike if not, as any and all engagement is welcome and helps me improve the channel and make more of the content you all find helpful, entertaining, and worthwhile. But without further ado, let's get into the Cities Skylines 2 Economy and Production Dev Diary. So it opens up by saying, while the economic simulation of Cities Skylines is similar in concept compared to the economic simulation in Cities Skylines 2, it was simpler in Cities Skylines. The production chain was relatively narrow, but the economic simulation served its purpose well within the game's other systems. As Cities 2 has been built from the ground up, and all of its core systems redesigned, there was also the need to redesign the economic simulation. It governs the households and their money and resource usage, businesses finding suitable locations in the city based on their evaluation of potential profits, available resources, connections, and workforce, as well as city service functionality and trade. And the design philosophy is as follows. We wanted to create a deep and complex system without it being too complicated for you to manage, allowing you to spend more time building the city rather than worrying about every minute detail at every possible turn. The system is modeled after real-life economic models to tie more realism into the game, and it's designed to balance itself out in most cases to support both new players and newly founded cities in their first steps to becoming bustling metropolises. It features financial aid in the form of government subsidies, which help the city's budget by taking care of a portion of the expenses in the early game. The subsidies also include unemployment benefits for private citizens to keep them on their feet, able to improve their lives, and become contributing members of society. So yeah, we heard a little bit about this in the featured highlights video, that government subsidies are going to be a part of the game. And just as I suspected, it sounds like it's going to be primarily to help you hit the ground running in the early stages of building your city, and then as your city becomes more profitable and has more of a sustainable economy on its own, those will probably be phased out. But it's interesting that they're still going to be around to provide unemployment benefits for private citizens, especially because, as mentioned in the video we watched the other day, there will be mass layoffs and things with businesses reacting to needing to make budget cuts, things like that. So there will be a lot of waves of unemployed people here and there, depending on the situation at the time. So it's kind of cool that that's tied into that as well. But getting back into it, it says, while the economic system is designed to support you in your city building vision, the government aid decreases as the city grows and becomes successful, allowing you to fully stretch your city management wings and fly. As you play the game, you can start to dive deeper into the economic simulation and its intricacies, seeing how the various agents make decisions based on your actions, as well as the existence of other agents, and you can start to make meaningful choices, guiding the city towards whatever your end goal is. Cool, so that just kind of recaps essentially what we just said a moment ago. So we'll go ahead and move on to economic cycle. The economy is formed by flows of various resources among the agents, households, businesses, and city services. The number of agents naturally grows as the city grows, and each agent tracks the amount of money and resources they have. The agents have expenses and income, and they try to balance them out by making decisions on what to buy and sell depending on their current situation. Households spend money to buy resources and pay rent. Businesses buy resources and turn them into other resources, which they can then sell to other businesses or customers. Businesses also pay rent for their building, which is taken into account when they calculate their profit. Certain city services also consume resources, and these expenses are added to their monthly upkeep. Okay, so all that's pretty straightforward so far. We'll keep going here. At the core of economic simulation are the zones and their symbiotic relationships with each other. Households look for homes and workplaces, industrial companies require access to resources, and commercial companies want products to sell and customers to sell them to. Taxes can be used to encourage or discourage different businesses in the city. If there's an abundance of a resource or product, Setting higher taxes can lower the excess production while still providing the city with a nice boost in tax income. On the other hand, if there's a lack of a resource or product, lowering the taxes or even subsidizing it by setting negative taxes brings more of those companies into the city. Subsidizing resources at the beginning of the production chain also benefits companies at the end of the chain as they get easy access to resources they use in their manufacturing processes. Cool, so that's pretty interesting. And now we understand kind of how subsidizing works on our side. Of course, we're going to receive government subsidies, which essentially sounds like it's just going to be grants and free money or whatever in the beginning of the game. But we can actually, once our city's up and running, subsidize different types of businesses and things as well by, as it said, applying negative taxes. So essentially paying businesses to produce certain goods in certain areas, which is not uncommon in the real world. So really cool that we have that kind of control. But getting back in, however, money doesn't circulate in a closed system and it doesn't appear out of nowhere. Rents, import payments, company profits, and player income are money sinks that remove money from the economic simulation. To balance the money sinks, the simulation also features money sources in the form of paid rents and company profits and the funds used by the player, which are distributed so that half of them go to the citizens based on their education level and half are evenly distributed to the commercial building's wealth. Other money sources are expert income from businesses and city services, tourists, and the aforementioned government subsidies for the city and individual citizens. Cool, so this does confirm something I suspected and we touched on in the video the other day. The money will be going to citizens based on their education level. I get why this is a component in the game, and I guess it makes enough sense, but it just slightly annoys me because in the real world it's not exactly how things work. Like you can have multiple degrees and still not make a ton of money. You can be, a super successful entrepreneur who never even, finished high school or something. Like there's a lot of variation in that. I know that, generally on paper, that's what, your parents like to tell you when you're growing up, go to school, get a good degree, get a good job. But that's just not how it is in the real world. But it's fair enough. I guess I can't think of a better way to create the income system for citizens in the video game, so I guess it makes sense this is the way that they're going to do that. So I don't know. I digress, but we'll keep moving on here. And we do have our first image here, and again, this is just showing us one of the economy menus. So budget in this case, I guess it's going to be the menu that we spend the most time in, most likely, managing budgets for the different incomes and expenses just to keep our city afloat and funded and profitable. So nothing too special there. Except, actually, this is one thing that is special, I guess we could say. The government automatically grants city subsidies depending on economic situations. A small city in an overall weak financial situation with poor tax revenue and low service fees receives a fair amount of subsidies, while a larger city in good standing receives negligible to no subsidies. So cool, we do have confirmation here that it is literally entirely dependable on how profitable your city is. So it is basically a mechanic to help us in the early game, it sounds like. And maybe to save our bacon later in the game if we completely screw something up so that it don't go completely bankrupt. But cool to get that confirmation. And here it just reiterates government subsidies help your city get started and are reduced as your city's economy grows. And here we get into households, which is something I am personally very interested in learning more about. Households look for homes in favorable locations that have workplaces, schools, and leisure locations close by. Large families prefer larger apartments found in low-density and medium-density housing areas, while small families are satisfied with smaller apartments in high-density and low-rent housing areas. Households also want to reside close enough to workplaces so that their pathfinding cost to work is low. Workplace pathfinding considers the education levels of the available jobs and gives a small bonus to jobs that match the employee's education level. Additionally, companies with fewer employees are preferred over companies with only a few open jobs, which ensures a somewhat even distribution of workers. The same applies to leisure options and shopping. Citizens want to spend more time enjoying the activities than traveling to them. Households with children want to locate near elementary schools since all children go to school if the city has any. Cool. That's pretty cool there. I like what it says about it giving a small bonus to jobs that match the employee's education level. There's still going to be a boost to the pathfinding cost to, say, if I have to drive a little bit farther to a job that suits my education level, as opposed to work a little bit closer at something that doesn't suit my educational level, they're still willing to do that. So I think that's a cool mechanic in there to kind of balance things out. And speaking of balancing things out, how it talks about companies with fewer employees being preferred over companies with only a few openings. So that'll kind of evenly distribute the workforce throughout the different companies rather than, one filling up and then, the company next door having 3 or 4 employees and 100 openings. That'd be pretty lame. So it's, cool that they're doing that way. But getting back into it, households go shopping when the AI detects that it lacks resources. It then checks the household members and their product preferences and chooses a product based on preference weights. Once the product type has been selected, it picks one of the household members, who then travels to a shop selling the desired product and makes the purchase. Once the purchase has been made, the product is transmitted to the household's resources. Cool, that's pretty straightforward. All these decisions are made to maximize the household's happiness, and the suitability of the household's apartment is calculated by adding together the pathfinding cost to their various destinations, free time left after work and travel, money they have left after expenses, and the services that match their current needs. If the household can't pay for rent and upkeep at the apartment, they look for other available apartments which match their ability to pay rent. The evaluation process again includes all of the above mentioned points to find a suitable place to maximize happiness. They also consider moving out of the city, even though it is given a lower probability than finding a home locally. If the household is very poor and unable to find a new apartment and lacks funds to leave the city, they become homeless. In this case, they can live in the city parks until their living situation changes. That's kind of a cool thing. So you'll literally have homeless in your parks if they're too broke to even leave the city. So it sounds like that's going to be their preferred choice. If, worst comes to worst, they're going to try to leave the city, but if they're too broke to even do that, they will be homeless and sleeping on park benches by the sounds of it. So that's quite wild. And we have our next image here saying a household may be unable to make rent due to high land value or a low income. And here we have these beautiful single-family homes. We can see here actually this home is level 4 out of 5. So that's interesting. There's going to be 5 levels. I wonder if they all have, visual changes along with them, because the actual architecture seems pretty uniform through here. Like it all seems to match together. You don't have, crazy high-tech houses next to some little rundown houses like you'd see sometimes in Cities 1. So. But cool. Yeah, everything looks good here. And next we're going to get into industrial companies. Industrial companies want optimal access to resources, places to ship their products, and workers to keep production going. They consider the value of production at the site as they choose where to found the company. The size of the property is relevant to the profit calculation, as larger industrial buildings have higher rents. Land value also affects the rent, so industrial companies prefer areas with low land value to maximize profits. However, different types of production require different amounts of space, so some heavy industry companies set up shop in larger buildings regardless of the cost. Companies order resources used to manufacture products, and when they estimate the suitability of a location for the business, they take into account the transportation costs, which are deducted from their profit. That makes sense? The new companies have a slightly higher preference for resources that are not in use in the city yet. Either they are produced there but exported without further refining, or they are only available from outside connections. Transport cost is calculated by the distance and the weight of the resource. For example, metals weigh more than textiles. Similar to resources, the distances to the industrial company's customers, resellers in commercial areas, and other manufacturing companies affect the company's profit. Companies favor short transportation distances when making resource orders to avoid transportation costs reducing the profit margin, which makes companies further away less likely to be selected as the resource provider. That all makes sense. So, just like in the real world, transportation cost is largely based on weight and distance, right? It's going to be fuel consumption and that type thing. So, yeah, that's pretty straightforward. And when the company is looking for workers, the complexity level of the production is taken into account as it affects the requirements for employee education levels. Some companies function well with employees with low education levels, while others require adequately educated workers to increase their efficiency, which in turn affects their production speed and profit margin. As the company's profit increases, they are able to invest more in the building upkeep alongside paying the rent, which slowly increases the building's level and the surrounding land value. Company level and efficiency also affect the production rate. This means that as the level and efficiency of the company increases, they can produce more with the same amount of expenses, water and electricity usage, for example, thus lowering the price of the produced unit. Cool, so it sounds like there's a bit of a natural balance going on there. So as the companies level up, they will increase the land value around them, but they will become more efficient with the resources and services that they're using. So their expense costs will go down in that regard, although they're raising the land value and that particular expense cost around them. So yeah, it sounds like there's kind of a lot going on there, but sort of balances out in somewhat of an organic way. So we'll just have to see when the game comes out exactly how that has to be balanced. But moving on, industrial companies occasionally evaluate their current production. They seek to maximize their income by finding the optimal number of employees given the current prices for resources bought and products sold, employee wages, transportation costs, and fixed costs, like building rent and upkeep. They do this by adjusting the scale of their production. If there is more demand for the products the company makes, they scale up production and hire more workers. If the demand for the product decreases, they scale the production down and let go of some of the workers in order to stay profitable. If the financial situation of the company decreases due to not making enough profit, they cannot pay for the rent and upkeep of the building, nor can they order resources for production. In this case, the expected company income and wealth becomes negative, resulting in the company going bankrupt and the building becoming abandoned. Some of the industrial zone buildings are warehouses that don't produce anything by themselves, but are part of the resource trading. When resources are bought from outside connections, they are transported to the warehouses where they are stored until further usage. As mentioned earlier, the price of the order consists of the transportation costs and the price of the resource, and companies can trade with both warehouses and outside connections. Warehouses attempt to stay well stocked and balanced by moving resources around in the city evenly distributed among the warehouses. In addition to zoned warehouses, many of the cargo transportation buildings function as warehouses as well. As these warehouses have special connections to the outside world, their transportation costs differ from the usual truck traffic. Cargo trains and ships have large capacities, which lowers the price of even the heaviest of resources, and air cargo can carry resources to and from anywhere with very little difference in transportation costs. And we get our next image here showing unoccupied buildings have no signs to display until a company moves in. So I think that's pretty cool. We'll actually have these little buildings sort of waiting on companies to move in. And it's got the, kind of a nice little your ad here, right? So that's pretty realistic and definitely something we didn't have in the first game. And it looks nice, actually. Looks like a nice little industrial unit. Great place for a business to be established, it looks like. Cool. And next we get into commercial companies. Commercial companies need products to sell, workers to service the customers, and to be located close to the residential areas which provide the bulk of the customers. Commercial companies order products from manufacturing companies in industrial areas as well as from outside connections. Similar to industrial companies, commercial companies take transportation costs into account when they evaluate suitable locations in the city, as they eat into the profits the company generates. They try to balance good connections to product manufacturers and customers, while they also react to the demand for different products. As an example, if a neighborhood doesn't have a grocery store, and the customers have high transportation costs, to reach the closest grocery store, the simulation marks the neighborhood's surroundings as lucrative areas for grocery stores to appear. Commercial companies look for a customer service workforce in the same way as industrial and office companies do. Citizens who live nearby and who are of a suitable education level are the best option. Often the customers and workers come from the same areas, which means that commercial companies thrive near residential areas in general. Commercial companies also react to the changes in the economy and adjust their service accordingly by scaling their service level up or down. As commercial companies level up, their efficiency increases, which in turn improves the service level and sales. As the sales increase, the individual products become cheaper. This affects the decision-making process of the citizens when they evaluate where to buy the products they need, and simulates the real world, where cheaper products attract more customers. Cool, so it's got like a very realistic economic supply and demand sort of factor there, where if the market is saturated, the product is easy to come by, that will lower the price, and then people will consume it more. So that's all kind of Econ 101 stuff, but I like it. And next we get into office companies as the last type of company to go over today. Office companies function in much the same way as industrial manufacturing companies. Their production uses electronics or software as they input resources, and their products are immaterial goods such as software, telecom, banking, and media. While good transportation connections are beneficial for offices, they are not as reliant on short transportation distances since the resources they require are lightweight and cheap to transport. The immaterial goods that they produce are sold wirelessly to manufacturing companies, other office companies, and customers, so they don't require physical access to their customers, and it doesn't weigh in on their decision making while evaluating suitable locations for founding their companies. Thus, it is more important to be close to the residential areas where the potential workforce lives. Offices require employees similar to industrial companies. The employees are the engine behind production, and it is important that the companies find suitable employees to fill the roles and keep the company efficiency high. The complexity level of the produced goods dictates the distribution of the educational level requirements in the company. Large office buildings can employ hundreds of employees. The evaluation of profitability and survivability for office companies is the same as other businesses. They scale the production depending on the economic situation, always maximizing income by hiring more employees or letting excess workforce go. If their profit decreases and they are not able to bounce back after adjusting their production scale, they cannot pay the required rent, upkeep, and resources costs, and they will go bankrupt. Cool, so it sounds like all of the different agent types, as they called it, sort of work in very similar ways. Of course, there's a little bit of nuance to it, like with the offices, their goods that they sell are immaterial, so they don't actually have to transport what they're selling out to other businesses and customers, so pathfinding costs aren't as much of a factor in that regard. But generally the way things work seem to be pretty uniform across the board, aside from transportation costs and things like that. And next we will talk about production in Cities Skylines 2. An important part of the city's economy is the production chain. Managing and adjusting the production chain adds a whole new dimension to the economy simulation and the gameplay. The production chain is designed so that you do not have to micromanage it, but if you so wish, you can really delve deep into the intricacies of what makes up the whole system. Starting from extracting the raw materials all the way up to specializing in the industry in the city, you can influence any step of the process. Having companies that produce the same resource gives a specialization bonus to those companies' efficiency. And now about extracting. To get raw materials into the city, you either have to produce them locally with a specialized industry area or import them. Having good cargo transportation connections will make it easier to import them, but extracting them locally will also provide income to the city in the form of companies paying taxes from their profit. To create an extraction area, you will need to use the Specialized Industry Area tool, which is activated when you place a Specialized Industry Hub building. So that sounds very similar to the Industries DLC mechanic from Cities 1, where you would place the sort of main office building and then would unlock all of the other buildings and allow you to paint the area. So it sounds like kind of a similar mechanic there. This tool works similarly to the District tool, covered in City Services, letting you define the area by placing corner nodes that create a full loop. However, a small area is already created when the building is placed. You can expand it to cover more land, but the area must be within range of the building itself, which will automatically harvest resources from that area. If the area is producing more of the resources than the city needs, then those will be automatically sold to outside connections. Having good cargo transportation options will greatly improve the overall traffic flow of the city, as well as reduce transportation costs for companies. And then we get into our next image here. It says define the extraction area and watch as buildings and vehicles get to work extracting the natural resources. Cool. Yeah, and you can kind of see in the shape how you draw out the corner nodes. You see how it looks like it was kind of dragged to this corner, dragged to this corner, and so on. So you can kind of see how that's placed, which Looks pretty cool. I think I prefer that over the old paint tool that we had in Cities 1, where it was essentially like a brush situation. Especially on console, that thing was just so hard to control and actually, get the shapes that you wanted out of it. I think being able to drag the corner nodes makes a lot more sense and will be a lot easier to control the shape, again, especially on console with a controller. But moving on, it is beneficial for the city when resource production and consumption are balanced. Overproduction of resources is not beneficial for the city or the companies. When there is a large surplus of a resource, the companies will export it to outside connections. However, when companies sell to outside connections, they also pay for the transportation costs. The more of the resource is transported, the larger the transportation costs will become, as it is required to be transported further and further away from the city, and these costs are deducted from the company's profit margin. A large deficit in resource production causes the companies to order resources from outside connections. This incurs additional transportation costs and causes a lot of truck traffic, which can hinder the physical transportation of the resources to their destinations. These transportation costs are, of course, also deducted from the company's profits. Cool, so that's just kind of reiterating what we've already been talking about. Transportation is going to be a big factor in profitability. If they have to pay to either import or export goods, it's going to have a negative effect. So we want to keep production kind of balanced to sustain what the city needs without necessarily under or overproducing too much, as doing so in either direction will eat into profitability and the sustainability of the companies, I guess. From the resources. The zoned industry requires resources that can either be imported from outside connections or gained from the specialized industry area within the city. Using these resources, the industrial companies process them further into material goods. These material goods can then be sold to other manufacturing companies for further processing, exported to outside connections, or sold directly to commercial companies. Additionally, offices function as manufacturing companies, but instead of producing material goods, they produce immaterial goods. Offices require more educated workers and immaterial goods, which are either produced by other office companies or imported from outside connections. And into products. At the end of the production chain, all of the produced resources and goods find their way to the end customers, whether they are households in your city or the outside connections. Thus, commercial companies are at the very end of the production chain. They turn the goods they buy into products that the households then buy to fill their resources and leisure demands. Cool, so that's a pretty straightforward system there. Sort of a simple cycle from production to consumption. And then resource production factors. To provide a small sneak peek behind the scenes of the simulation, we're going to talk about the resource prices and their weights. The design behind the resource gameplay is influenced by real-life resource logistics, simulating how cities are formed and function in the real world. While they are not directly exposed in the game, all of the resources have several factors which affect the simulation. A couple of these are the price, weight, and space. Price naturally refers to the actual price of a unit of a resource. The price determines how many units of the resource a household can buy when they restock their household resources. The price of the resource is constant, but the availability of the resource contributes to the transportation costs, which define the end profit margins for the companies. Weight refers to the abstracted physical weight of the resource, which affects the resource's transport cost, of course. Light resources, like pharmaceuticals, incur a small transport cost, while stone, steel, etc. are heavy, and in turn incur high transportation costs. Heavy stuff should ideally be produced in the city to avoid high transportation costs, but if it needs to be transported, having a ship or train connection is a good way to reduce these costs. Space affects the profitability of the resources as well. Some resources require more space for manufacturing than others, and companies that manufacture resources that take up large amounts of space prefer to be located in areas where the land value is low, so the company can make the most profit. And then we have the example here of a minerals factory. The factory's expenses are mostly dictated by the cost of acquiring its input, stone. As stone is ubiquitous, but rather heavy, the transport costs are probably a large part of the cost, making the company more likely to locate near a stone quarry. Additionally, the factory is probably quite large, so it will try to pick a location where the land price is not very high. Another large cost comes from paying the wages of the relatively untrained workers the factory uses. The factory also buys some water and a lot of electricity, the prices of which are set by the player. Lastly, the factory earns money by selling its product to either local electronics or chemical factories, or exporting them out of the city altogether. If it has to export, it will also pay the transportation costs and be less profitable. Finally, the player will tax whatever profit is left, or may even subsidize the mineral's production if he wants to have more of it produced in the city. Cool, so again, kind of just saying more of the same. But I kind of like how they broke down, price, weight, and space are all going to be factors. So there's going to be sort of a constant set price for each resource. But the weight, of course, is going to impact any transport costs. Space is also going to impact any transport or storage cost, I guess you could say. And that's where it comes into play, the location that these companies are going to be founded, the access to resources from either within the city or having to export. And also the loss of money if you're overproducing within the city and having to export and take a hit to the profits on that. So it definitely sounds like there's going to be a lot to balance there, but it's making a lot of sense. It's a pretty clear cycle. I don't think it'll be too much micromanagement you'll have to get into, but definitely a lot of depth there if you do want to dive into that kind of thing a bit more. And next we get into specialized industries. In Cities Skylines, the production chain is very simple with 4 types of raw materials, which can be processed and further turned into goods consumed by commercials. For Cities Skylines 2, however, we wanted to add more depth by providing more specialized industry types, more production variations per resource, and more options to combine those resources into new products. Specialized industry areas typically require natural resources to function: fertile land, forest, or oil. With the exception of livestock farming and stone quarrying, specialized industry areas which can be built on land without any natural resources. Of the natural resources, oil and ore are finite, resulting in less and less resources being extracted, while fertile land and forests replenish their resources over time, but are vulnerable to pollution. Cities Skylines 2 features 9 different specialized industry areas. You can choose between 4 types of farming, which include livestock farming, which requires no natural resources, while grain farming, vegetable farming, and cotton farming need to be situated on fertile land. Forestry naturally requires forests. Stone mining can be utilized anywhere on the map, but coal and ore mining both need ore deposits in the ground. Lastly, we have oil drilling, which can extract oil from the ground. Cool. Specialized industries do not affect the industry zoning demand, and the economy of the companies in the specialized industry areas functions differently as they cannot go bankrupt. That's interesting. Instead, they downsize production and the number of employees when profits are down. This can especially happen if the area runs out of natural resources. Cool. So they cannot go bankrupt. Once you establish specialized industry in the city, it can upsize or downsize as things go on, but it will not go bankrupt. You will not lose that specialized industry unless you decide to delete it. So that's good to know. And quickly about specialized industry vehicles. They are not part of the normal traffic and do not drive on roads, but they still travel on paths created by the simulation when industrial areas are created. The vehicles operate within these specialized industry areas only and gather resources from within the area. Once they gather enough, they drop the resources at the main building, which then processes the resources and sends them to other companies for further processing as part of the production chain. And this image here says specialized industry areas automatically spawn vehicles to harvest and transport resources back to the main building. Cool, so it sounds like these specialized industry vehicles are going to be things like logging trucks, tractors, maybe even oil derricks, that kind of thing. So I think that's pretty cool. That'll add to the realism. You'll kind of see some of the work going on throughout the day and whatnot. So that's pretty cool. And I like that it won't interfere with the main traffic so much. It'll kind of just go on within the area. That'll give you that realism without clogging up the roads unnecessarily as well. So, and then the last thing we are talking about today is the economy panel. One of the core parts of understanding the city's economy is, of course, the economy panel. From there, you're able to take a deeper look at the city's finances, loans, taxes, service budgets, and production of different resources within the city. With the tools and information provided in the economy panel, you can affect the various parts of the simulation and plan and develop your city. Get a quick overview of your city's finances with the budget tab. So we can see the budget tab here first. And this breaks down our taxes, service fees, service trade, and government subsidies, as well as any loans if we take out any loans. From the budget tab, you can take a quick glance at the city's revenue, expenses, and its current monthly balance. Additionally, highlighting each section reveals quick details of each of the revenues or expenses on the right side of the panel. It includes a description as well as an overview of where the revenue or expenses come from. Loans work a bit differently than in Cities Skylines. Instead of taking one of 3 available loans, there's now only one loan available, but the loan is adjustable and it can be paid back or increased at will. You can take a loan and determine its size by moving the slider right and left. The loan is finalized by using the accept button. With this same method, you can repay the already existing loan or increase its size to take out even more money. The loan size has a limit that increases on each milestone. The interest rate is based on the size of the loan, and the loan itself is automatically paid back in monthly payments. You can also pay it back manually, either partially or entirely if your city's finances allow for it. The loan interest rate can be reduced by building the City Hall and the Central Bank. That's cool. Loans can be costly but can provide your city with the money it needs here and now. And here we get a look at the loan panel. So we can see here we have a $26,100,000, euro, whatever you want to call it, unit of money. I'm just going to call it dollars because I'm American, so bear with me here if you're not. So we have a credit limit of $26,100,000 basically. We are manually deciding to take a $13 million loan. Looks like our interest rate is going to be 9%. That sounds pretty brutal on 13 million, but I guess that's part of the strategy of the game, right? Just like the strategy in real life. Don't take out a bunch of loans you can't pay back. It's stupid. But cool. It's nice that it's there. Definitely a useful mechanic. I absolutely used the loans that were available in the first game, at least the first and second loans. By the time we unlocked the third loan, usually, the city was so profitable that I never really needed a loan again. But getting started, once you hit that first milestone or two and take out that first loan or two, really made a difference and helped get things started. But with government subsidies this time around, even that's a little bit different. We'll have some free money coming in. So yeah, the loans may be even less necessary than they were in the first game. But I digress. And getting back into the article, each of the zone types has its own overall tax rate, which can be adjusted with sliders. On top of that, however, you can adjust the taxes of individual groups by expanding the menu for that specific zone type. For residential zones, you can adjust taxes per education level. For commercial, industrial, and office zones, you can adjust the tax rates for each of the different product types. Each tax can be set to be between negative 10% and 30%. Setting negative taxes is a great way to guide the production of different resources to specialize the city in a certain field. Cool, and that's getting into the subsidies. So basically, if we have a negative 10% tax on something, we are giving an automatic 10% profit back to the producer of that good or material. So definitely a big incentive to get into that industry, right? And then we have another image here, says adjust taxes for each zone type or expand the type to set individual taxes for products or education levels. And this just gives us a little snapshot of that. So we're looking at the residential here, and we can see that the well-educated and highly educated are being taxed at slightly higher amounts than the uneducated, poorly educated, and educated. Again, this is rather realistic in that you typically will see different tiers for taxes in a lot of countries, and the more you make, the higher percentage of that goes to the government. But regardless of what you make, the government always has its hand in your pockets because it is greedy and evil. So we can also be greedy and evil, but it's just a matter of what percent and to what extent do we want to let our evil government greed go. From the Services tab, you can adjust different city services budgets which affect the service building's efficiency and in turn the quality of said services. The service budget can range from 50% to 150%. For electricity and water and sewage, you can also change the service fee, which affects the consumption, but also company efficiency and the happiness of citizens. For example, lowering the service fee for electricity will increase its consumption, company's efficiency, and the happiness level of citizens. With these tools, you can fine-tune the service output to match the current demand if you so wish. However, an important design aim of these is that they do not need to be constantly micromanaged. But for the more experienced players, they can provide an additional layer of complexity to the simulation. And here it says you can lower the service budget to save money, or if your services more than cover your city's needs. Cool. And cool, this is very familiar from Cities 1. Not a whole lot to dive into here, though I do like the look of the menu itself. And we are about to wrap up here. But it says from the Production tab, you can observe each of the materials, material goods, and immaterial goods your city is producing. And from that, you can also observe whether your city's production of the resource is either in surplus or deficit. You can highlight each resource to reveal additional information which shows you where the resource can be gained from and where it can be either sold or used. For example, wood can be produced from forestry, or it can be imported. Wood is also used for heating, and it can further be sold to processing companies or be exported to outside connections. Get an overview of what your city needs and produces locally, and see what materials are needed to produce a certain product. Cool, so this gives us a look at actual production chains. That's pretty interesting. So we have tons of different goods that we are producing here by the looks of it. Some of it we can tell what it is, like vehicles and clothing. Some of it's a little more abstract or don't really know what it means. But in either case, so we can actually select something and determine how to produce it. It'll tell us what we need to process, how to move it to the next stage in the production chain, and so on. And even how to either get it out to consumers directly or export to outside connections. So very cool. There's going to be a lot of intricacies here with each of these different types of resources. So we'll just have to wait till the game comes out to really be able to spend some time with this and understand it, I think. But it wraps up here by saying, with this information, you gain a deeper understanding of what your city is consuming and how much your already existing industry is producing. This will help you plan your city and transportation more efficiently, which in turn can help reduce traffic and provide more tax income to your city to realize your dreams. We hope this look into the economic simulation of Cities Skylines 2 has given you some ideas of how you can specialize your city and benefit from a balanced production chain. We continue our development diaries next week with a look at game progression. Perfect. So that is it for this week's Dev Diary. The economic simulation in Cities 2 is clearly going far beyond anything we ever saw in Cities 1. A lot of what we already had in Cities 1 has been hugely broadened and expanded, while some things are entirely new altogether. But personally, it's looking like a great mix of both to me, but I want to hear what you guys are thinking. Overall, are you guys happy with what we now know about economy and production in Cities Skylines 2? What are you all excited about, or what questions or concerns do you have? Please let the community know in the comments below. I'm really curious to hear what everyone else is thinking. But lastly, I truly appreciate you hanging out with me today and want to encourage you to consider subscribing if you haven't already, and to hit that like button if you enjoyed today's video or found it informative. And, of course, if you didn't enjoy the video, feel free to leave a dislike as well. But with all that said, I want to thank you again, and I hope you all have a great day.